Good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us for another Discover Wildlife presentation. Tonight's presentation is entitled Discover the Kalahari Desert, and for this we have the wonderful Helen Bryon giving this presentation, and I'll shortly introduce her in a moment. My name is Nick. I'm one of the directors of the company, and it's a pleasure to have you all with us this evening. It's great to see some familiar names, so welcome one and all. For the few of you who aren't familiar with wildlife worldwide, just to give you a quick overview, as the name would suggest, we're a wildlife travel company. We send wildlife enthusiasts all over the world. We offer group tours, we offer small group tours, we offer tailor-made holidays that are privately designed just for you. And we also offer a whole series of photographic trips as well. So for those of you who are very keen on wildlife photography and nature photography, there's a whole host of expert-led trips that we offer for the keen photographer as well. We visit all of the corners of the world, Africa, Asia, the Americas, Europe, of course, and the polar regions. And we have an enormous amount of activity and product going on within the UK as well. And that's a really big growing part of our destination portfolio as well, because there is wonderful wildlife to be seen right here on our doorstep as well. So that's an overview of who we are, if you aren't already familiar with us. And for those of you who do know us, you will, I'm sure, have come across Helen at some point in the 5 years that she's been with us. Either she has talked to you about booking a trip, or she has organized a trip for you, or you'll have seen one of her other wonderful presentations before, either one of these Discover evenings that we've been doing for the last 18 months or so. We may have seen her do one of these presentations in person. But either way, you'll, I'm sure, have heard of her. You may even have traveled with her to her beloved Africa at one point or another. But I think it's fair to say, Helen, that you are a true Africaphile. There is something that runs through you that is just pure Africa. And the Kalahari is, I know, a place that is especially close to your heart. So it's great to have you doing this presentation. And I'm for one, really looking forward to it. So thank you very much for putting the time into this, Helen.
Oh, thank you.
Just before I hand over to you, I'm just going to do a couple of housekeeping points so that everybody knows how the evening works. So feel free, please, to ask any questions about the presentation during the recording. You're very welcome to submit those via the Q&A button, which is probably at the bottom of your screen if you're looking at this on a PC. It may be at the top if you're looking at it on an iPad or a tablet, something else like that. So the Q&A function is one way you can submit questions to us, or you can use the chat function, again, either at the bottom or at the top of the screen, and you could submit questions there. And what we'll do, we'll collate all of those while Helen is talking, and then we will then start asking her a few questions once her presentation is ended, and we'll try and get through as many as we can. We usually get a great number of questions, and we can't sometimes get through all of them, but we'll do our very best to get through as many of them as we can. So that's all from me in terms of the introduction and the housekeeping, Helen. So I'm going to hand over to you to give us a 45-minute presentation or thereabouts, where we can discover the Kalahari Desert with you. So over to you, Helen.
Great. Thank you very much, Nick. And as always, thank you to everybody for joining us as well. We do really appreciate it. You might want to put your earplugs in now. When Nick said that you may have talked to me, I did actually, first thing I thought of was, yeah, I may have talked at you before. So apologies in advance for the enthusiasm that is about to follow, because we are literally talking about pretty much my favorite place in the world. So if you've seen these before, you'll be aware that I'm a fan of the old satellite maps. The Sahara is obviously the biggest desert covering the African continent. we are going to be talking about an area down in the south, the Kalahari Desert. Now, I say desert, but actually the Kalahari is not a true desert. It receives too much rainfall to be classified as such. So it is a semi-arid area, if we're going to split hairs. And by and large, it covers Botswana, my second home. Now, it actually covers an awful lot more than that. So the Kalahari Desert itself, although predominantly, yes, it's covering Botswana, the basin actually goes much further afield. It branches into Nick's speciality, which is Namibia. It branches into South Africa to the south, another one of my second homes. I have quite a few. It even goes into southern Zambia and into southern Zimbabwe. If you visited Hwange in your travels from Victoria Falls, perhaps, then essentially, yes, you've got Kalahari dunes going through there. Now, talking of dunes, if we look at the southwestern part of the Kalahari, an area that I will be talking about, this is what you're going to be looking at. That beautiful, rich red sand that is often more commonly associated with Namibia, that will give you photo opportunities to those arid dwelling creatures that have adapted to live in these wild parts of Southern Africa. You then move into Botswana, where the central Kalahari, a game reserve that I'll be talking about. This is your scrubland. It's grass, it's flat, and it is a haven for predators and, of course, for their prey. Moving across to the northeastern parts of the Kalahari Basin, and you get to an altogether different element, and these are the huge salt pans, Naipan, Mahadi Pan, and flat as pancakes, stretching as far as the eye can see, very few people, massive landscapes, brilliant wildlife. This may look like it's devoid of life, but trust me, it's not. The Kalahari is home to the usual suspects, the usual magnificent suspects, may I say. So your Kalahari black-maned lions. The weird, your bat-eared foxes. These look like a creature out of Star Trek or E.T., but I find them quite incredibly endearing. So you've got the mainstream, you've got the weird, you've also got the wonderful. You've probably heard me bang on about cats and dogs in the past. I cannot get enough of them. These are one of my favorite creatures, and they are dotted across the Kalahari, one of the most successful predators on the African continent. It's also home to the unusual and to perhaps the most sought after creatures in Southern Africa. This is an aardvark, and we're going to be talking quite a bit about aardvarks throughout this presentation. It's often on the hit lists of people who've been to Africa, who've been drawn in by her magic, who are addicted to going on safari, much like me, who go back again and again and again. The number of people that have seen aardvark, however, are comparatively few. So the Kalahari does actually, in fact, provide home to some of these incredibly sought after creatures. They're not just sought after by us. I'm just going to sit and let you take in this photo for a minute or two. I have been lucky enough to be in an area where a male lion was basically playing with a pangolin, and it was after dark. I certainly didn't get a photograph like this. This is one of those 1 in a million sightings. But where's it taken? Just in the southwest Kalahari, just an area that I'm going to talk about a little bit later, a magnificent reserve in South Africa called Swalu. Now, we can't promise that you're going to get this kind of sighting every day, but you've got to be in the area in order to have a chance. So this whole presentation is really going to centre on the weird and the wonderful creatures that choose to make the Kalahari their home. But because the Kalahari is generally associated with Botswana, this is where we're going to start. So it is more commonly known, perhaps for the first timer to the area, they will make a beeline to the Okavango Delta that you can see up in the top of this particular country representation. Fed by floodwaters that come down from the Angolan highlands on an annual basis, and also by the rains that fall between November and April or thereabouts. So over their summer months, making it an ideal destination over our nasty winter months. If you were to travel during the rainy season, the birding in the Delta is absolutely exceptional. And for many people, when they go to Botswana, they're going to the Delta, and that will be the main focus, the very northern part of Botswana. We're going to concentrate on the rest of the country. And I'm going to be talking about predominantly 3 of the wonderful holidays that we can organise for you. They are all group holidays, but we can always look at tailor-made as well. But 3 fantastic holidays that will really get you into the heart of the Kalahari, and we can decide which one we think is best suited to your needs, depending on the creatures that you're particularly looking to see. There is a 4th trip that we offer, and this is through the Travelling Naturalists, our sister company, and it is Spring Flowers of the Cape to the Kalahari. So this trip doesn't actually enter Botswana, but it is worthy of a mention because it enters the Kalahari Trans-Frontier Park, which you can see circled down in the bottom left of your map. Now, the Kalahari Trans-Frontier Park actually covers 3 borders: South Africa, Botswana, and Namibia to the west. And the trip that we offer, the Spring Flowers from the Cape to the Kalahari, that departs every August. We have a departure in place for next year. We also have one in place for August 2023. Starting in Cape Town, you meander your way up the beautiful west coast of South Africa, taking in West Coast National Park, which every August, subject to rains, literally explodes into colour with wildflowers in their springtime. And in those wildflower meadows, miles and miles and miles, as far as the eye can see, of all these different vibrant colours that just literally erupt in the springtime. You may come across one of my favourite creatures. I know I say that for every single one. Crikey, I sound like Bruce Forsyth. But I love Hemsbok or oryx. I think they're one of the most beautiful, statuesque creatures, whether they're against a red dune in Namibia, whether they're in the central scrublands of Botswana, or whether they're in South Africa here on the West Coast National Park, and further north into Namaqualand National Park, which is actually where this photograph is taken. So wildlife and botany, oh, that appeals to me. Once you've gone up the west coast of South Africa, we end up at Augrabies Falls, which where the Orange River falls through this incredible gorge. And here you're only about a 2-hour drive from the Kalahari Trans-Frontier Park. So of course we visit this en route, and then we go up to the Trans-Frontier Park. This is where you have a mixture of dry riverbeds, red dunes, and you've got incredible wildlife. So we spend 4 days up in this area on this trip. My last visit, which was in 2019, I was lucky enough to see cheetah, 4 male coalition, in fact, so 4 cheetahs strolling along the top of a dune, marking every now and again, one after the other, after the other, after the other. But what stands out to me for the Trans-Kalahari Frontier Park are the extreme number and variety of raptors. So from this bateleur, for example, one of the most beautiful eagles in the world, Its name in Latin actually translates as beautiful face, and it takes a full 7 years for these facial markings to actually develop. When they're younger, they're in almost a sort of olive greeny blue colour, which is quite striking in itself. But the full plumage comes at 7 to 8 years old, and they are beautiful. This is a female, more white on the underwing. But the number of raptors, the number of owl sightings that I had here, and the number of your smaller, unusual creatures, your African wild cat, we literally stopping to look at them. There were so many of them taking shade from the heat during the day in the trees, despite it being winter at the time of my visit. Honey badgers, you name it, you know, crikey, for the smaller arid loving creatures, the Transfrontier Park and the Kalahari is an absolute mecca. So that's the first trip, just just touching on it briefly, because I did do a presentation on it earlier this year, but from Cape Town up the west coast to Algrabi's Falls and then ending up in the Kalahari Transfrontier Park. But let's get to the main events, the 3 trips that I'm really here to talk about. And we're going to start with another small group trip that we operate every March and April. So this is at the end of the wet season in Botswana. It is coming into autumn in Botswana. And this concentrates on the central part of the country, really. We start and end in Maun, so an overnight flight from the UK into Joburg, connecting flight up to Maun, and from Maun we go in a clockwise direction, essentially. If you can see my mouse, Maun being here at the bottom of the delta, only an hour and a half away down here is a Lake Ngami, sometimes called Lake Ngami, whichever you prefer. And we spend 2 nights in the Lake Ngami area. And it's a fairly unassuming start to the trip. The lake is not a protected area at all. It's grazed. There's cattle grazing. There's small scale farming that you'll come across. But after dark, things change. And because it's not a protected area, there aren't particularly many predators. And as a result, at night, you get all manner of creatures coming to the fore. Now, from Lake Ngami, we head down to the Central Kalahari Game Reserve, which is literally one of my favorite places on the planet. From there, we come up to the Makadikadi Pans, and we spend 3 nights in the Pans before heading back to Maun, and that in essence is our Botswana Rare Mammals trip. Now we go out, as I say, every March and April. We have a maximum group size of 6. So your vehicle that will be used throughout, this is what it looks like. So 3 rows of tiered seats, every seat will be a window seat, and supporting this vehicle will be another vehicle full of camping equipment. Now, we're not talking Euro hike here or Vango, we're talking full on, super comfortable, non-participatory camping. So any of you that have done our Best of Botswana trip or our Wild Dogs in Botswana trip, or if you've done the Botswana's Rare Mammals trip before, you will be familiar with this setup. Big tents, there's no stooping when you're in here. You have all your bedding, all your towels, and at the back you can see there is an ensuite bathroom, and you can have hot or cold water to order, bucket showers, there is lighting. So these are supremely comfortable. They're all set up. So on arrival in Maun, you will drive for about an hour and a half to the Lake Ngami region, which is where you will then essentially start your Botswana Rare Mammals holiday. There is a mess tent, as you can see in the center here. That's where all of your meals are served, where you go for sundowners and you spend your evenings kicking around a campfire, listening to the sounds of the bush coming alive, which is just the best thing in the world ever, under the most beautiful night skies, beer in hand. Life doesn't get much better. Now, You've arrived in Maun at lunchtime, having flown from the UK. You're at Heathrow the night before, you're in Maun at lunchtime. It's a short drive, hour and a half down to Lake Ngami. So you have a bit of time to settle into camp, to work your way around how things work, perhaps have a shower, just have a little siesta, get over the flight. That night, you're going out on your first night drive. So you're getting straight into the action. This is one of my favorite owls, southern white-faced owl. I love how inquisitive owls are with the movement of their heads, the rotation of their heads. And again, because this is a semi-farming, grazing area, you don't have to concern yourselves with running into hippo or big predators or elephants. That's not going to happen pretty much. But because of that absence of bigger game, you possibly might come across some of the smaller stuff. And some of, in many respects, the really interesting stuff. Cape porcupine. I love me a porcupine. When I was working in the bush, if ever I had to go out and check a vehicle at night, I always had to watch out for these. I don't know why porcupine hang around a mechanic shop in the bush in the middle of the dark, but they do. And when they give chase, you don't want to be there. They don't shoot their quills, contrary to popular opinion, but they will reverse into them. I've seen lions with faces absolutely covered with quills. If they pick a fight with the wrong porcupine, those lions are going to know about it. So this is Africa's largest rodent. If you've ever had the fortune to see a baby porcupine, oh, the iciest heart in the world is going to melt. They are stunning little creatures, but pretty ferocious when they're grown up. And the big draw to this particular area and why we start this trip in Lake Ngami, this is Botswana's rare mammals. We hope it's going to do what it says on the tin. On the recce that my boss Dan did with his wife in March 2019, before we launched our first departures of this particular trip, they came across striped polecat. They came across tiny fat mouse. I mean, surely you want to see one of those just because of the name of them. But they, on both nights that they spent in this area, they got within 30 to 40 meters of aardvark. And this is actually one of Danny's photos. So thank you, Danny. And aardvark, you always remember your first sighting, your second sighting. You pretty much remember every sighting where aardvark are concerned. They are nocturnal creatures. When people ask me to describe what they are, I'm always like, they're almost like kangaroo-like, their heads and their big floppy ears, and yet they've got that pig-like snout. And I just found out this evening when I was reading up on a few fast facts how you differentiate a female from a male. The female has a slightly lighter shading on her head, and the tip of her tail is white. So there we go. You learn something new every day. But life at Lake Ngami for your 2 nights that you spend there, there's not a huge amount going on during the day. So that's your rest time, bearing in mind you've just come off an international flight. It's all about going out at night and seeing what you can see. The next point on your itinerary with Botswana's rare mammals is this beauty. Oh, this is the Central Kalahari Game Reserve. And the Central Kalahari Game Reserve, to me, just conjures up massive skies, that white soil that is hard baked beneath your feet. Everything is parched. There's scrubland, and within that scrubland, there are all manner of creatures. Very few elephant here. However, we did track and follow an elephant the day that we left. My last trip here was back in 2015, so quite a while ago. We were told categorically you would not see elephant. We followed one, or the footsteps of one, for a good 3 hours on our way from camp out to the gate. And then just before we got to the gate, this huge bull decided to show himself. So there are elephants in the Central Kalahari, but you won't see many of them most likely. This is an incredibly arid place. To me, it conjures up images not only of the never-ending sky, but of the most incredible antelope, the oryx, desert adapted. I've talked in the past about how they do a nasal pant, which is a way of cooling the air so that when the blood around the brain is cooled through this nasal panting that they do. It's also home to springbok. Now, springbok are known for pronking. And if you think that going on safari is all about finding the big stuff, just sit and watch a group of springbok pronking. It's the most marvelous experience. They leap up, arching their backs into this reverse U shape, and they bounce like kangaroos, and they chase each other doing so. And it's just the most wonderful thing to watch. It's absolutely superb. So from pronking springbok to oryx/hemsbok, that never-ending sky that I mentioned, this is where you're going to find your corrie bustards and your secretary birds strutting through the scrublands, looking for reptiles, looking for snakes. I love a secretary bird, just fantastic creatures, and in flight, oh, they are just marvelous. Little steenbok hiding. When after they have pooped, for want of a better word, they use their back feet to cover it up, presumably to disguise the scent, which is not a bad thing to do when you're sharing your home with predators galore. On my last visit, as we drove into the Central Kalahari Game Reserve, one of the first things that we came across was this massive coalition of male cheetah. And they were just strutting across the veldt. It was absolutely superb. Then, as the day begins to lend itself towards those lengthening shadows, and you know that the sunset is coming, you can taste that first beer around the fire, this is when the Central Kalahari comes into its own. We are going to the Central Kalahari to find you the unusual. So yes, there's cheetah, yes, there's lion, but we want the unusual. And this marvelous time of day, sunrise and sunset, the crepuscular time, also the time when the nocturnal creatures are becoming more active, and then the following morning as they're returning to their burrows to sleep away the heat of the day. From bat-eared foxes to aardwolf, I mean, my word. So termites, good rains basically bring a lot of termites, and that will attract aardvarks, that will attract aardwolves. It will also attract a lot of mice and murids. That attracts your raptors. And that's why in these arid areas, when the rain does come, there's an explosion of life. This again is one of Danny Free's photographs. This is probably one of my favorite photos that she's ever taken. Just absolutely stunning. And this was on their last visit to the Central Kalahari Game Reserve. But also just the beauty of your big five animals as well. If those of you that have heard me before, you know that I can't get enough of lion. Absolutely love them. I think she is absolutely beautiful. The intensity of that gaze, and of course your magnificent black-maned lion of the Kalahari against that white hard-baked soil and the scrub beyond. So as we go on to our first evening safari there, the mornings we will be going out early in the Central Kalahari Game Reserve. We've got a lot to try and find. So again, you know, your lions are generally nocturnal hunters, but they are opportunistic and they will take any chance that they can. But this is one of the key creatures that we are looking for in the Central Kalahari, brown hyena. Much shaggier than your aardwolf. The aardwolf almost looks like it has a muzzle over its snout, whereas with the brown hyena, it's a more uniform color. The stripy legs, these are, they can be nomadic hunters. Well, they're not really hunters, they're scavengers and they're termites eaters, but they can be in clans, they can also be nomadic. But this is a key species that we are looking for. In addition to that, honey badgers. Every morning I had incredible sightings of honey badgers on my last trip. Aardvark we're going to be looking for, and again, by going out very early in the morning, these nocturnal creatures will be returning to their burrows, and if we're very lucky, we will come across them. Honey badgers, again, the most ferocious creature, but again, curiously endearing, here in some kind of standoff with a jackal. But during the day, your diurnal hunters. There are a couple of packs now of wild dog within the Central Kalahari Game Reserve. This is actually where I saw my first ever wild dog, so it's always going to be somewhere special for me. Another thing makes me laugh every time I think of the Central Kalahari Game Reserve. Well, the day that we arrived, we'd driven up from South Africa. We'd had incredible sightings coming in. We were setting up camp. The sun was going down. There were lion spoor absolutely everywhere. We could hear the noises of the lion. We knew that they weren't far away. So we were setting up camp, and all of a sudden we just heard this kind of, and we were like, oh my God, one of the people putting up their tent has obviously seen a snake or seen a lion or something. And it was a violet-eared waxbill. This is one of them. It's a tiny bird. It would fit in the palm of your hand, but she was so excited, and so were we when we realized what had made her just kind of go, and so to me, again, violet-eared waxbills, they are, I love them. Beautiful, beautiful birds. This is another one of Danny's images, another creature that always comes to mind when I think of this particular part of the world. Ground squirrels. Incredible just how they use their tail, to ward off the heat in the middle of the day. But don't look too closely at that photograph. It begins to become slightly disturbing. So we will move on. That would be a good time to move on to the next part of our journey. And this is where we go to the northeastern part of the country, to the Makgadikgadi Pans. Now, this vast salt lake in times gone by, this is just the most incredible scenery. There are small islands of baobabs, Baines baobabs being a very sort of historical and well-known area. But for much of the year, when there's no water, this is an incredibly arid place with things like meerkats, or officially suricats, making it their home, and again, your desert adapted animals. But there is an incredible migration that takes place within Botswana. And we time this trip by going in March and April, when we offer our departures. We are coinciding with this migration, and it is a zebra migration, some wildebeest as well, but predominantly zebra. And they are literally traveling 1,000 kilometers on an annual basis. They are migrating from the Chobe River in the north, the mighty Chobe River, down to Naipan and the Makgadikgadi Pans, and they do this to follow the rainfall. So essentially, they should be there at the time of our visit in March and April, but there's a very interesting story behind the migration of these creatures and why it is so special today. Because back in the late 1960s, Botswana entered a trade agreement with the EU, and it was to provide beef. So diamonds and beef have pretty much always been the biggest exports where Botswana is concerned. But a stipulation by the EU was to make sure that there was very little chance of foot and mouth disease being transmitted from wild animals to cattle that were now grazing in similar areas. And as a result, veterinary fences were constructed, miles and miles and miles of them. But these fences prevented this annual migration that has been undertaken by zebra from the year dot. So there was a huge outcry at, for want of a better word, hundreds and thousands of corpses, because these animals were trying to migrate and these veterinary fences were in their way and they couldn't. early in the 2000s, these fences were taken down, and it's incredible how the migratory instinct has remained in these creatures. So they spend the dry months up in the Chobe, where there's water from the Chobe River, and then in the first few months of the year, they are migrating down to these pans. And the pans come alive. It's not just zebra, but obviously the surface water that can often remain there until April or May will actually attract water birds as well, flamingos, Egyptian geese that you can see at the back here, amongst others. So it's a really, really fantastic time to visit the Makgadikgadi pans. So as I say, by traveling in March and April, we coincide our rare mammals trip with a wonderful migration as well. But the pans in general, I would say, are fairly well known for these wonderful creatures, probably one of the most ferocious creatures as well, but incredibly endearing. And so, yeah, essentially, this is a fantastic trip. So from Maun to Lake Ngami, down to Central Kalahari Game Reserve, up to the Makgadikgadi pans and back to Maun. And that is Botswana's rare mammals. So, time to leave my beloved Botswana and time to go to my beloved South Africa. Now, we offer 2 trips in South Africa that will enable you to enjoy the Kalahari. Okay, so borders don't matter here. And you can see south of the Kalahari Trans-Frontier Park, we now have an arrow, and we also have another one just south of Chwaneng. So the arrow on the west here is pointing towards Swalu, and where we operate one of our group trips, which is South Africa's Rare Mammals in Style. And the arrow that you can see in the center of your screen is pointing down to another one of our trips, our Kalahari Conservation Experience. So they're both in the South African Kalahari. They are quite different, these trips. So I'm going to start by talking to you about Swalu. Now, I'm not going to labour this because you've probably heard this before. When I talk about Swalu, I tend to get a little bit giddy. Now, Swalu is what's known as located in the green Kalahari. The green Kalahari because, as you can see here, it's green, but that is when the rains are there, November to April. We offer this trip in June. And there is a very distinct reason for that. This is what the bush at Swalu looks like in June. And this is why we are going. So pangolin and aardvark. We're never going to offer guarantees of seeing wildlife. It would be foolish to do so. But pangolin and aardvark sightings are what have put Swalu on the map. And the reason for traveling in June, which is the Kalahari winter, you don't really want to be going, well, you can go in summer, but if you like your high 40s, then summer will suit you just fine. You have the migratory birds. Heat doesn't bother me, so if I had a chance to go, I would go. I wouldn't have any issues. But if you prefer to have your temperature in around about the 20s to mid 20s, perhaps a little bit more manageable, then you will go in the winter, which is June. Our reason for offering South Africa's Rare Mammals in Style in June is simply because the nights get cold. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. They don't get cool, they get cold, and you're in the desert, so it's extreme temperatures. So at night it gets cold, and if you are a nocturnal creature, you are probably going to minimize your activity in the bitterly cold hours of the night. And as a result, pangolin, which is nocturnal, and aardvark, which is nocturnal, they still go out at night, but they come out to forage much earlier. So they're coming out mid-afternoon. What do we do mid-afternoon? That's when we go out on safari. So this works really quite nicely. So our afternoon safaris in June are going to be concentrating on looking for aardvark and for pangolin in particular. If we find those creatures, by and large, we will get off the vehicle and we will walk with those creatures. And on my second afternoon in Swalu, this was actually in July 2019, I had the incredible fortune to be out there, to go out on safari. We found an aardvark and I walked through the bush following it on foot for an hour and a quarter. Unbelievable. You keep enough distance that the creature, obviously, it may be aware that you're there, it may not be. You know, the ears are the clue here. Its greatest sense is its hearing. And these guys are foraging primarily for termites. There will be antbirds following them. So when they start to dig, they've got incredibly long claws and incredibly thick claws, and they dig. And then they put that snout in with a huge long tongue to essentially siphon up all those lovely termites. So that's why we go in winter, because your nocturnal creatures will be coming out to forage earlier. So pangolin, aardvark, aardwolf, potential for caracal. There are habituated meerkats here as well, so you can spend quite a bit of time with them. We would normally go looking for the other creatures in the morning. So suricats. I had the best wild dog sighting of my life with bells on at Swalu. I was able to follow a pack, well, try and run across the dunes to keep up with a pack. And I was about 2 or 3 meters away from the pack as they pulled down a warthog, taunted it, and then killed it. All the while I was behind a scrub, a small piece of bush, and then they flocked in the red Kalahari soil around me. And it is a sighting that I will never, ever forget. Phenomenal. So Swalu is about pangolin, aardvark, but it's also about some of your more mainstream dogs. And this is where that incredible photo was taken that I showed right at the start of the presentation. So again, you have to really be in the right piece or right place at the right time with a huge blooming great piece of luck to get a sighting like this. But I had wonderful lion sightings, cheetah, rhino. You know, essentially this is not a big 5 reserve. It has everything but elephant, but it is South Africa's largest private game reserve. That means flexibility. If you want to do nothing but night drives, that's what you do. We operate a group trip here, and the group trip stays at this incredible lodge. There are only 2 on the reserve. Now, this one is called Tarkuni. This is a lodge that you take out in its entirety. So when our group goes, there will be 9 of the group plus me, and we will have local guides and trackers. We will be split across 2 vehicles, and each vehicle will have a guide and a tracker, and I will go between the 2 vehicles when we go out on every morning, afternoon, night safari, whatever we choose to do. You can horse ride here if you wish. We can do walking safaris, because it's literally 111,000 hectares with just 2 lodges on it, chances are we won't come across anybody else when we're out in the bush. The accommodation itself is absolutely sublime. It's understated, but the service is attentive, it's warm, and your surroundings are simply stunning. So there's a fire pit, outside dining, there's also a wonderful pool, and you can see there is just nothing else there. The starscapes here are phenomenal, and the accommodation really quite lovely. So a group size of 9 plus me will be split across 2 vehicles, and we go out in June. Now, just down the way, I say down the way, we're probably talking about a 7-hour drive or thereabouts. Well, maybe not quite, but let's say a 4 to 5 hour drive away from Swalu. We can offer another wonderful Kalahari experience. Now, this is South Africa's largest Big 5 reserve. So to differentiate, Swalu is South Africa's biggest private reserve at 111,000 hectares. But this is South Africa's largest Big 5 reserve, and it's 96,500 hectares. So there's not a huge amount in it. There are 2 lodges on Swalu. There is one where we are here. And this is another group trip of ours with a maximum group size of 6 this time. And this is our Kalahari conservation experience. It's a relatively new trip. We only launched it a couple of months ago. We have departures next year, 2023 and 2024 in place. And this trip we offer in September. So often if you ask people when to go to the Kalahari, they will say spring or autumn, simply because in winter it can get very cold and in summer it can get very hot and it can be quite a windy place. You know, there's not a lot of shelter here. But this particular trip we offer in the spring months. It's a manageable time temperature-wise. It's a fabulous time in terms of new life. It's just, right, we have a different sort of key species here, but not just the species. This is a trip for people who want to get stuck in to hands-on conservation. So we will do game drives. We will get into our vehicle. There will be 6 of us on the vehicle plus our guide, and we will do game drives, but we will do more than that. We will get involved in game counts, in predator monitoring. We will do vegetation surveys. We will get involved in bush clearing and encroachment. We will be looking at camera traps, setting them up, analysing data that comes from it. So if you don't just want to observe wildlife, but you also want to play a more hands-on role in the conservation of said wildlife, well then this is a trip for you. The camp is incredibly simple, but those tents are lovely, those raised tents, they do have an ensuite. And essentially, we go out here for 7 nights, just like we do at Swalu, and you will have Big 5 potential along with your arid loving creatures, your oryx, your wildebeest, and some incredible photographic opportunities, even though it's not a dedicated photographic trip, but you're going to be in the heart of the action. And because it's Big 5, potentially kills like this, rhino, they have dogs, they have a couple of packs of dogs, but in terms of other creatures, if you have all those predators, you also have to have the prey. And I love this shot, absolutely love it. So this oxpecker that's getting stuck into this giraffe, but key species, if brown hyena is your #1 wished for species, this is the trip for you. Again, no guarantees, but based on feedback from our partners that we work with out here, they are generally quite surprised if they don't come across brown hyena perhaps every 2 days. Now, I don't want to set the expectation too high because obviously we can't guarantee that, but if you're looking for brown hyena specifically, Kalahari Conservation Experience is the trip for you. Now, if you can therefore just picture yourself sitting on your vehicle, beer in hand, watching a brown hyena coming down to drink, you've got dirt under your fingernails, you're dusty, you have had the most amazing day, you've been outside, you've been getting stuck in, and then you're going to end the day with a beer, looking at the waterhole, and then watching the sun go down over the mighty Kalahari. Wowzers. That's September next year. So in a nutshell, that brings us to our conclusion. So in a nutshell, the Kalahari, we can offer you 4 trips. The first is spring flowers from the Cape to Kalahari, going Cape Town up that west coast, Namaqualand for the spring flowers, or Grabby's Falls, and then ending in the Kalahari Transfrontier Park. But that's only, it's ending in the Kalahari. That's why I'm kind of just parking that slightly. So for the Kalahari itself, your 3 big trips: Botswana's rare mammals, where you combine the Central Kalahari Game Reserve with Lake Ngami and also the Makadikadi Pans. You've then got Swalu, which is our South Africa's rare mammals in style trip. If pangolin and if aardvark are your number ones, that really is the place to go to. There is a price tag attached to it. So you're basically paying for the fact you've got all that space. And as I mentioned, on our group trip, we go for 7 nights and we stay at Tarkuni, taking the lodge out in its entirety. There is one other lodge on Swalu, on the reserve, and we were able to offer that on a tailor-made basis. If you go on a tailor-made basis, you will always have 1 vehicle, 1 guide, and 1 tracker, and they are yours to do with as you wish. You decide when you're going to go, you decide how long you're staying out for, you decide everything. You don't have to worry about other people. If you are literally wanting ultimate freedom and flexibility on a trip, well, then you go to Swalu tailor-made, but you pay for it. Finally, for a more hands-on experience, you go for our Kalahari conservation experience. Key species here are brown hyena, but it is Big 5. There's plenty to see and do. You can go on game drives, but you can also do an awful lot more. So if you want to give a little bit back, that's the trip for you. And that is the Kalahari. 8:22, that's not bad. It's quite short for me.
Amazing, amazing. Not that you finished at 8:22, though that is amazing in itself, Helen, and that deserves a standing ovation, if nothing else.
The desert sells itself. It's epic.
Yeah. But amazing, just fascinating. What a really enjoyable presentation. Great images, and I mean, it's a part of the world that, oh my God, my heartstrings are kind of pining to get to that arid environment. An arid environment is what I love.
We should do a combo trip, Nick. We should do Kalahari and Namib. Can you imagine?
Okay, fine. You're on. Let's do it.
I might just spontaneously combust.
Yeah, God almighty, I think I would. Oh, that was amazing. Really, really fantastic. And I have to say, I went to the Kalahari years and years ago, so we're kind of going sort of 20 or so years ago, and I haven't been back to Kalahari as such since then. But my God, I must, yeah, sign me up in a heartbeat, in a New York minute, as they would say. Yeah, I'll be there. Hey, listen, so thank you. Absolutely brilliant. All 3 parts of the presentation really, really illuminating. So thank you very much, Helen.
Pleasure.
Really appreciate that. True to form, we've got questions. Okay, and I'm going to go from the top, and I'll work down them. I'm not going to be able to do them all, ladies and gents. I'm really sorry that there are so many, but I'm just going to kind of whistle stop through some of the key ones. And Sue was first in with the first question, and she was asking about group sizes, but in particular, do the trips cater for single travelers or only couples? And of course, we cater for single travelers. In a nutshell, that's it.
We do, but I do just have to mention something here. So yes, on all of the trips, well, all of the trips bar 1, we can cater to singles, and there is a single supplement that can be paid to ensure your own room. The one trip that works differently is the Swalu, South Africa's rare mammals in style. Because we take out the lodge in its entirety, there is, if you wish to have a room to yourself, there isn't actually a single supplement. It's essentially paying for the entire occupancy of the room, which is based on 2 people. So it's not quite double, but it's not far off. So that's quite an expensive exercise. where Swallow is concerned.
It's worth clarifying, not wishing to split hairs on this, but Sue, you're asking about single travellers. You may be a single traveller who is willing to share, and we have lots of single travellers who are very keen to travel, and they're very open and very happy to do that on a shared basis with somebody who they're yet to meet. Obviously that is a very cost-effective way of doing it. But if you wish to travel as a solo traveller, yes, of course we can do that. What we tend to do is work with our suppliers and encourage them as much as we can to not bill people extraordinaire just because they're wanting to travel on their own. Something that we're not especially keen to promote, hiking up prices just for somebody because they want to be on their own. There's all sorts of reasons for that. So we try to limit those costs as much as we can. But yes, doing the shared single traveller is a really good option. With the trips that I've led, I have lots of single people travelling on them, and they're all always happy to share. As long as they've got advance warning of that, then they're happy as anything with that. So that answers that question. Spotting at night, Helen, and the use of spotlights. I'm presuming that is something that is done by the driver, or is it something that is done individually by the spotter? How does that work? Are you doing it? How many spotlights are there?
It depends where you go. If you're at Swallow, there is a tracker who sits on the front of the bonnet, essentially, and they will be equipped with a spotlight. It usually has an infrared filter on it. They're very sensitively used. You tend not to shine into the eyes of these creatures. So yes, in Botswana, when you're at Lake Ngami, then yes. When you get to Central Kalahari Game Reserve, you generally it's similar to a national park in terms of the fact that you generally have to be back at your lodge by nightfall. So you are usually back by about 8:30. But because the camps are mobile and because they're open, that doesn't, the wildlife doesn't adhere to that. They can still continue to come and join you, and they're usually fairly inquisitive. So yes, sometimes you'll have a spotter, sometimes it will be your driver who is doing the spotting, but it's always done sensitively. Yeah.
Is the accommodation that you're using, is that all unfenced? Is it all wild, effectively wild camping? So it's free.
The mobile. There's usually dedicated campsites. So in Botswana, for example, they're dedicated campsites, but they are unfenced. So they're fixed spots that you go and use, but they are unfenced. Swallow and is unfenced, both lodges. The Kalahari Conservation Experience, that is a fenced area in which you sleep. So again, it just depends on the trip, really.
And it is thrilling, I have to say. It's absolutely thrilling. It only adds to the whole experience of being in an unfenced camping environment. It's an unfenced lodge environment, because you do hear the animals passing through the camp at night. You do hear them passing very close by at night. When you hear the lions in the evening, and through the night, when you hear elephants coming through the night, it is absolutely thrilling. It really.
Oh, you're alive.
Yeah, you certainly do. But it's just wonderful to hear wildlife around you all the time. And at night time, your senses are that much more heightened, and you're that much more aware of your position in that area, in that location. And I love it. Yeah, absolutely.
It's the sounds at night that I miss the most about the bush. When I was living there, I used to go to sleep with leopards going past and grunting, and hippos laughing in the dams, and it's those sounds. Once the hyenas start going and the lions start going, crikey, everything else stops.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. And we've had a very good question here from Di. Thank you for this one. As Helen said, and as we all saw, the images in the presentation were stunning. Her question is, are the groups made up of high-end photographers who are, overly keen photographers, and you know, is she going to feel out of place there with just a point and shoot camera? She's not a photographer herself, but I would say these are not photographic trips as such, are they?
No, we do have a dedicated SWALU, South Africa's rare mammals in style, that is a photography trip.
Yep.
So we've got 3 regular departures and 1 dedicated photographic trip there. But the Botswana, the Central Kalahari, the conservation experience, they are, you know, I mean, people like to document, don't they? You go on a wildlife trip, people like to take photographs, but whether you've got a point and shoot, whether you've got a 400mm lens, whatever you've got, you know, the photographic opportunities are there, but the overriding factor as to why people are traveling is because they want to know everything about the natural world in which they find themselves at the time. So no, I wouldn't worry about that.
No, I wouldn't worry about that either. I used to fancy myself as a keen photographer, and you know, I've got a camera with a couple of lenses, and I really do enjoy using the camera and capturing moments, you know, with the camera. Increasingly, though, when I travel more recently, or rather, you know, pre-pandemic, I should say, recently, I found myself unconsciously putting the camera down and really engaging with the natural world that was right there in front of me and right around me. And I found, in actual fact, that with the camera, I was actually missing out on quite a lot.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I only realized that since, you know, putting the camera down. And, you know, I realized that, you know, as much as I tried, I'm never going to be, you know, an award-winning photographer. And in actual fact, I'm really happy with engaging with the wildlife right there in front of me. And, you know, that mental photograph that you take, it does stay with you forever.
It does.
You know, it's always going to be perfect as well, because you saw it there, that moment, you know, with your own eyes, rather than, oh, the image isn't quite exactly as I want it to be. For some photographers, that spurs them on to, you know, want to improve their photography, which is terrific. But equally, for others, you know, like myself, it's actually encouraged me to put the camera down. And with the trips that I lead, I usually have very good photographers and complete novices. You know, they're not photographers at all, and it works really well. And often what happens is that the very good photographers, the better photographers, the more experienced photographers are then, you know, sharing tips amongst the group, and you know, encouraging those with a compact to take it off automatic, put it onto manual, start mucking around with the settings a little bit, and then suddenly, you know, a new budding photographer is born again. So I wouldn't let cameras worry anybody,
no,
really, to be honest.
And we have an ever expanding, you know, portfolio of dedicated photographic trips that will attract the, you know, the super keen photographer. But again, they're also designed for people regardless of skill level. They're designed to just enhance your photographic knowledge and expertise regardless of what your current level of standard is, but certainly don't let it put you off. I'm the same. I don't take anywhere near as many photos as I used to. I'd rather concentrate on the experience.
Yeah, absolutely. A good question here from Nick. Where does the Kalahari end and where does the Namib start?
Oh, we've lost your face, Nick, just so you know. Your camera seems to have done one. It's generally considered around about sort of Fish River Canyon in southern Namibia that the Kalahari starts, I would say. Right, I think we may have lost him. But I can access a couple of other questions here. Jane is asking, how cold does it get at night in SWALU? It can get down into minus figures. However, my visit in July, I didn't find it anywhere near as cold as I have done in other parts of South Africa. So I was quite pleasantly surprised. And with regards to David's question, how intense is the conservation work for those of a mature vintage? Oh, I like how you've put that. It's entirely up to you how you get stuck in, David. To give you an idea, our client base is fairly wide, but I would say 50s, 60s, 70s and above would be our sort of norm. If you are a more mature vintage, like a good cheese or wine, you can get as stuck in as much or as little as you like. You can just enjoy the incredible surroundings in which we'll find ourselves. That's absolutely fine. Alison, I can't wait to go to the Kalahari with you too. And she's going to Namibia with you, Nick, as well. Nice. Loretta is asking, what's the local beer like? Cold and good. Right, okie doke. So we seem to have lost Nick. He is the one who can end this presentation. But I'm going to call it a day there, I think. And if there are outstanding questions, I can always, if you just drop your email address, I can always come back to you tomorrow if necessary. So if you just let me know who you are and what you would like to know, then I will be in the office from 9 o'clock, or you can give me a call. So thank you very much for joining us.